My name is Trevor Ellis. At 34 years old, I live in a small corner of Columbus, Ohio, in a modest but tidy apartment where the morning light filters through the window, illuminating the plastic model cars I meticulously assemble during long, sleepless nights. I work as a mechanical engineer at an auto parts manufacturing company, a stable job with a salary that allows me to live comfortably, pay off student loans, and even send a little money back to my family. Sounds like a smooth life, doesn't it? But if you think so, you don't know my story. The story of how my family, those who were supposed to be my refuge, became the sharpest line cutting into my heart. I grew up in a middle-class neighborhood in the suburbs of Columbus, where identical houses lined up neatly, with carefully trimmed lawns and white wooden fences. My father, Harold Ellis, was a factory worker, a tough man with rough hands and eyes that always seemed to be searching for something distant. My mother, Linda, was a part-time accountant, gentle but easily swept away by emotions, especially when it came to my younger brother, Travis. And Travis? He was the center of the Ellis family universe, the bright star my parents always gazed at, whether he accomplished anything or not. Travis is 6 years younger than me, but the gap between us is more than just numbers. From a young age, I could sense the difference in how our parents treated us. I was the reliable child, the one tasked with fixing a leaking pipe, driving the family to the grocery store, or spending hours on homework without needing reminders. Meanwhile, Travis was the genius, the visionary, even though he rarely finished anything. Once, when I was 12, I spent an entire summer building a bicycle from scraps in the garage, only to hear my dad mutter, "Nice job, but don't make a mess." At the same time, Travis scribbled a Superman drawing on a piece of paper, and my mom hung it on the fridge as if it were a Picasso masterpiece. I remember standing there, staring at that scribbled drawing, feeling like a stone was pressing down on my chest. The unfairness didn't stop at small things. It grew over the years like a crack in a wall you try to ignore but keep spreading. When I was 16, I earned a partial scholarship to a prestigious engineering school. My parents smiled, patted me on the shoulder, and said, "Good job, Trevor. You can handle things on your own now, right?" No celebration party, no gifts, just a nod and the expectation that I'd figure it out. Meanwhile, Travis, with his mediocre grades and carefree attitude, still got a brand new bike from our parents just because he looked sad when his friends had cooler ones. I didn't envy Travis, honestly. I just wanted for once for my parents to look at me the way they looked at him. With pride, with the belief that I too was special. But that rarely happened. I learned to accept my role, the older brother, the caretaker, the one who was never allowed to fail. I remember nights lying in bed listening to my parents talking in the living room, my mom's voice full of excitement as she described Travis's latest big idea, some vague business plan he'd sketched out in 10 minutes. I wondered if they ever thought about me, about the nights I stayed up studying, about the times I gritted my teeth and worked extra hours to pay tuition. Probably not. I was the background, and Travis was the painting. When I was 19, life hit me square in the face. My dad lost his job at the auto parts factory where he'd worked for over 2 decades. I still remember the day he came home, his heavy footsteps dragging across the wooden floor, his face like a shattered stone statue. Mom sat at the kitchen table, her trembling hands clutching a cold cup of coffee, her eyes red and swollen. "We'll get through this, Harold," she said, but her voice faltered as if she didn't believe her own words. The bills started piling up: electricity, water, insurance, medications. I saw them on the table, white envelopes with bold red letters, overdue. No one said anything, but I knew the family was falling into a deep hole. I couldn't just stand by and watch. I took on 2 part-time jobs. During the day, I worked at a fast food restaurant, the smell of grease clinging to my clothes so strongly I could never fully wash it out. At night, I delivered for a grocery store, driving an old truck through the dark streets of Columbus. I still tried to keep up with my engineering studies, rushing from classes to shifts and back to the dorm to study until 2 a.m. Some days I only got 3 hours of sleep, my body so exhausted it felt like I was falling apart piece by piece. But I didn't complain. I couldn't. My parents already had enough burdens and I didn't want to become another one. Meanwhile, Travis lived as if the world still revolved around him. He was 13 in high school and still pampered by our parents like a child. I remember coming home one night after a delivery shift so tired I nearly fell asleep on the couch. Travis was there playing video games wearing a brand new t-shirt Mom had just bought. He needs new clothes to feel confident at school, she explained when I asked why they were spending money on things like that at a time like this. I didn't say anything, just nodded, but inside a small fire flared up. Confident? I didn't even have time to look in the mirror, let alone think about confidence. What hurt the most was when I found out my parents had drained the family's savings, the money they always said was for both of us, to pay for Travis's college tuition when he got there. I didn't get a single cent. I had to take out student loans, which at 34 I'm still paying off bit by bit. When I asked Dad about it, he just shrugged, avoiding my eyes. Travis needs a chance, Trevor. You already had your scholarship, didn't you? You'll be fine. Fine? I wanted to scream, to ask if he had any idea what I'd sacrificed to be fine, but I didn't. I swallowed my anger as I had 1,000 times before and kept moving forward. After graduating, I landed a job as an engineer at an auto parts manufacturing company. The pay wasn't bad, enough to cover my loans, rent a small apartment, and start building my own life. But I couldn't turn my back on my family. My parents were still struggling. Dad took on odd jobs that didn't pay enough, and Mom cut back her hours due to declining health. I started helping them. First, it was the property tax, $250 a month to keep them from losing the house I grew up in. Then the utility bills, about $300. Then health insurance for the whole family, another $500. In total, I was spending nearly $15,000 a year, almost a third of my income, to keep the family afloat. I didn't do it for praise. I did it because I thought it was my responsibility, because I was the eldest son, because I didn't want to see my parents living in poverty. But every time I sent money, a part of me cracked. My parents rarely thanked me. Occasionally, Mom would say, "Thanks, Trevor," but her voice was light, almost like a polite formality. Dad never said anything. They poured all their energy into praising Travis, who had graduated college but didn't work. Instead, he threw himself into startup ventures. Ridiculous ideas like a pet food delivery app or a t-shirt shop with printed slogans. All of them failed. But my parents, they called him a visionary. They even remortgaged the house to give Travis money to start a company, despite him not having a proper business plan. I remember one visit home, bringing a bottle of wine for a family dinner. I sat at the table listening to Mom talk about Travis's latest project, some app related to artificial intelligence, though I'd bet he didn't even understand what AI was. "Your brother's going to change the world, Trevor," she said, her eyes sparkling. I nodded, smiled, but inside I wanted to scream, "What about me? I'm the one paying to keep this house, to keep the lights on, to keep this family from starving. Don't I deserve a shred of recognition?" But I didn't say it. I just clenched my jaw, took a sip of wine, and told myself I didn't need them to see me. As the years passed, the financial burden became a part of my life, like a heavy backpack I couldn't take off. I cut back on personal expenses, no vacations, no new clothes, no dining out. I lived minimally, not because I wanted to, but because I had to save money for the family. Meanwhile, Travis kept living like a spoiled kid, spending the money our parents gave him without a thought of contributing. Once he showed off a new watch to me worth $300 while I was calculating whether I could afford new tires for my car. I looked at him, wanting to ask, "Do you have any idea what I'm sacrificing?" But I knew the answer. He didn't care, and neither did our parents. I started to feel like an ATM, existing only to dispense cash when the family needed it. Every month as I made the transfers, I asked myself, who am I doing this for? For love? For duty? or because I still hoped that one day my parents would look at me and say, "Trevor, thank you. We're proud of you." Deep down, I knew that wouldn't happen. And then, one event changed everything. My dad's 65th birthday party, where everything I'd been holding back exploded, where I realized that my sacrifices weren't just overlooked but taken for granted as my duty. I spent weeks preparing for my dad's birthday party. It wasn't just a party. It was my way of proving that I cared, that I was still part of the family, even though sometimes I felt like just a faint name in their story. I spent $500 on food, fine wine, and decorations. I arranged every detail myself, a table draped in a white cloth, flickering candles, and a jazz playlist that Dad loved listening to on weekends. I even ordered a 3-tiered chocolate cake, the kind Dad used to say he loved when I was a kid. I wanted that evening to be perfect, not just for Dad, but for myself. A chance to feel like I belonged. That afternoon, our house was bathed in warm golden light. Guests started arriving. A few of my parents' friends, my cousin Mason, Aunt Susan, and of course Travis, who showed up with a new girlfriend named Chloe. I glanced at her. Blonde hair, a confident smile, and an expensive, form-fitting dress. Travis introduced her to everyone as if she were a prize he'd just won. My parents, as usual, lit up when they saw Travis. Mom hugged him tightly and Dad clapped him on the shoulder, laughing loudly. "That's my boy." I stood in the corner of the room holding a glass of wine, trying to ignore the familiar ache rising in my chest, the feeling of being left behind. The party started smoothly. People chatted, laughed, and complimented my arrangements. "Trevor, you did a great job," Aunt Susan whispered as I poured her more wine. I smiled, feeling a flicker of warmth. But then the moment I'd been waiting for, a chance to share something about myself, came and vanished like a cold gust of wind. I stood up, gently tapping my wine glass to get everyone's attention. "Everyone, I'd like to say a few words," I began, my voice slightly shaky but determined. "Today is a special day, not just because it's Dad's birthday, but because I got some good news from work. I've been promoted to lead engineer and I received a big bonus for a project I just completed." I paused, hoping to see pride in my parents' eyes, hoping for a moment where I wasn't just the background. But before I could say more, Dad cut me off. "That's good, Trevor," he said, his tone flat, then turned to Travis. "By the way, has everyone heard what Travis is working on? His new project is a game changer. Tell them about it, Travis." The entire room shifted its focus to Travis, who launched into a grandiose speech about some tech app I was certain would fail like all his previous ventures. Chloe sat beside him, nodding along, looking at him as if he were Elon Musk reincarnated. I stood there, my wine glass suddenly feeling heavy, as if the room had sucked all the air out of me. I tried to swallow the stinging pain, telling myself not to care. But things got worse. While everyone was eating cake, Mom pulled me into a corner, her voice low but resolute. "Trevor, we need to talk. Travis needs $50,000 to invest in this project. This time it's real. Your brother's about to make it big." I stared at her, unable to believe my ears. $50,000? I didn't even have that kind of money in my savings, not after pouring most of my income into property taxes, utilities, and health insurance for the family for the past 7 years. "Mom, I don't have the money," I said, trying to keep my voice calm. "I've been paying the property taxes for this house, the utility bills, the health insurance, all from my money. I don't have much left." Mom frowned as if I'd said something offensive. "But Travis needs you, Trevor. Your brother has potential. You can't be that selfish." Selfish? The word stabbed into my heart like a knife. I took a deep breath, trying to stay composed. "Mom, I've been supporting this family for 7 years. I think Travis should try getting a job for a while, gain some experience before jumping into these projects." I spoke slowly, hoping she'd understand. But before she could respond, Dad stepped over, his face red from wine and anger. "A job? You're telling your brother to go work some dead-end job like a failure?" he roared, his voice echoing through the room. Guests started turning their heads, the air growing tense. "Who do you think you are, Trevor? Showing off your little salary? The money you give this family is nothing compared to what we've done for you." I stood frozen, unable to believe what I was hearing. Nothing? $15,000 a year for 7 years was nothing? "Dad, I've paid over $100,000 for this family," I said, my voice trembling with restraint. "I'm not showing off. I'm just stating the truth." But Dad didn't listen. He stepped closer, pointing a finger in my face. "If you can't come up with $50,000 to help your brother, you don't deserve to be part of this family. Get out, Trevor. Don't come back unless you got the money." His words hit like a sledgehammer, leaving me nearly breathless. I looked at Mom, hoping she'd say something, anything to defend me. But she just stood there, staring at the floor, silent. Travis, sitting at the table, smirked as if he'd just won a game of chess. Chloe, his girlfriend, let out a snide remark, loud enough for me to hear. "What a cheapskate. He probably thinks he's so important." Her laughter cut through the air, sharp as a blade. I don't clearly remember how I left that room. All I know is I stepped outside, the frigid Columbus night air slapping my face. I stood by my car, hands trembling, tears welling up but held back by clenched teeth. 7 years of sacrifice, 7 years of pouring money and effort, only to be kicked out of the party I'd organized, only to be told I wasn't worthy. I drove home, my mind reeling with questions. What did I do wrong? Why am I never good enough? And most importantly, should I keep sacrificing for people who don't even value me? That night, sitting in my dark apartment, the faint glow from the model cars on my table reflecting dimly, I realized something. I couldn't keep going like this. I couldn't keep being the family's ATM. But to change, I needed to take a bold step, one that would shake everything I'd ever known about family and myself. I sat there in the quiet room, the only sound the ticking of the wall clock, feeling as if the entire world was pressing down on my shoulders. My dad's words, "You don't deserve to be part of this family," echoed in my head, each word cutting deeper into my heart like a knife. I thought about the past 7 years, the months I spent grinding away at work, sacrificing every personal pleasure just to keep the family home from foreclosure, to keep the lights on, to ensure my parents didn't have to worry about hospital bills. And in return, what did I get? A finger pointed in my face and a declaration that I didn't belong. I felt as if I'd been pushed off a cliff, and for the first time I asked myself, why do I keep pulling myself back up for people who don't even appreciate me? My phone buzzed. It was Ryan, my best friend from college, the one who always knew how to pull me out of emotional storms. "Trevor, you okay?" His voice was full of concern as I recounted what happened at the party. I told him about the hurt, about being kicked out of the party I'd organized, about Mom's silence and Travis's smug smirk. Ryan didn't interrupt, just listened, and when I stopped talking, he sighed. "Trevor, you've done more than enough. You don't owe them anything anymore. It's time to live for yourself." Those words, simple but sharp, pierced through the fog in my mind like a beam of light. Ryan was right. I didn't owe them. Not anymore. I looked around my apartment, where I'd lived minimally to save money for my family. No pictures on the walls, no big screen TV, no summer vacations. All I had were a few model cars on the table and a depleted savings account. I thought about the $15,000 a year, the money I'd sent without a single heartfelt thank you. And then I made the biggest decision of my life. I would stop. No more property taxes, no more utility bills, no more health insurance. I would no longer be the family's ATM. The next morning, I sat at my computer, hands trembling as I canceled all the automatic payments I'd set up for the family. I called the insurance company, canceling the policy I'd been paying for my parents. I emailed the utility company, requesting that the bills be transferred to my dad's name. Each click felt like a cut, both painful and liberating. It was as if I was dismantling a part of myself, but at the same time I felt a new rush of air, as if I'd unlocked a door that had been sealed shut for years. The consequences came faster than I expected. Just 2 weeks later, Mom called, her voice frantic. "Trevor, what's going on? The electricity's been cut off. There's no water either. What did you do with our accounts?" I took a deep breath, trying to keep my voice steady. "Mom, I've stopped the financial support. I can't keep paying for everything anymore." There was a long silence on the other end. Then Mom shouted, "Are you trying to destroy this family? You know how hard things are for us." I wanted to say that I'd been carrying their hardships for 7 years, but I quietly hung up. For the first time, I didn't feel guilty. But my family didn't stop there. Travis sent a barrage of texts, a long string of accusations. "You're so selfish, Trevor. Who do you think you are, cutting everything off? You're ruining this family." I read the messages, feeling a stone weighing on my chest, but I didn't respond. Then Dad called, his voice trembling with anger. "Trevor, you'll regret this. We raised you, and this is how you repay us?" I didn't argue. I just said, "Dad, I've done enough," and hung up. Things escalated when I got a call from an unfamiliar number. It was a police officer. "Mr. Trevor Ellis, we've received a complaint from Harold and Linda Ellis accusing you of financial abuse of the elderly and sabotaging family property." I almost laughed at the absurdity, but the pain quickly surged. My parents, the people I'd supported for 7 years, were now suing me. I explained to the officer that I'd only stopped providing financial support, that I had no legal obligation to pay those bills. He took notes and said he'd follow up if needed, but his tone told me this wasn't just a simple misunderstanding. The biggest shock came a few days later when Mom called again, her voice weak, almost tearful. "Trevor, your dad had a heart attack. It's all because of the stress you caused. Can you come back and help?" Those words twisted into my heart like a knife. I almost jumped in my car to rush home, but a part of me, the part exhausted from being manipulated, stopped me. I texted my cousin Mason, who's always been straight with me. "Did Dad really have a heart attack?" I asked. Mason replied immediately, "No, Trevor. Your dad's perfectly fine. They're just trying to guilt you." I sank into my chair, hands cradling my head, both relieved and furious. They'd lied, using Dad's health to pull me back into their cycle. In the days that followed, I felt like I was walking a tightrope. One side the newfound freedom, the other the pain of cutting ties with my family. I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, wondering if I'd done the right thing. I'd severed the bond with the people I once thought were my entire world. But then, in the darkness, I remembered Ryan's words. "You don't owe them anything." And I realized for the first time in my life I was choosing myself. But choosing myself wasn't as easy as I thought. In the early days after cutting off financial support, I lived in a strange state, as if I'd just stepped out of a sealed room but could still hear its echoes. My phone occasionally buzzed with messages from Mom, sometimes pleading, sometimes accusing. "Trevor, you can't abandon your family like this," she wrote. Travis texted too, his tone as arrogant as ever. "Who do you think you are, ditching Mom and Dad to prove some point?" I didn't respond. I couldn't. Each message felt like a needle pricking my heart, but I knew if I replied I'd be pulled back into the old cycle. The cycle of endless responsibility and being taken for granted. Amid that emotional storm, I never expected that the people I'd paid little attention to would become my guiding lights. One Saturday afternoon, as I sat in my apartment staring at the 1967 Mustang model car I'd been assembling all week, my phone rang. It was Aunt Susan, my mom's older sister, whom I only saw a few times a year at family gatherings. Her voice was gentle but firm, like a true mother's. "Trevor, I heard everything from Mason. I just want to say I'm proud of you. You did the right thing by setting boundaries. If you want, come to my place tonight. Just me, Mason, and a few friends. No parents, no drama." I hesitated. Part of me wanted to decline, to curl up in my apartment and let the pain gnaw at me. But another part, the part craving to belong somewhere, pushed me to agree. "Okay, I'll come," I said, my voice hoarse. When I hung up, I felt a small warmth spreading in my chest, as if someone had lit a candle in the darkness. That evening, I drove to Aunt Susan's, a small house in the Columbus suburbs with a garden full of hydrangeas. Mason was already there, tall with a friendly smile, and he greeted me with a hug so tight I could barely breathe. "You did it, Trevor," he said, his eyes shining with sincerity. "I've seen how they treated you for years, but I didn't know how to help. Now you've helped yourself." Mason's words were like a cool breeze, soothing wounds I didn't realize were still bleeding. Dinner at Aunt Susan's was simple but warm. Homemade spaghetti, salad, and a bottle of cheap wine she insisted was a masterpiece. We sat around the dining table chatting about everyday things, Mason's job at a construction company, Aunt Susan's love for gardening, and even fond memories from when I was a kid when Mason and I used to sneak into the garage to fix Dad's bike. No one mentioned my parents or Travis, and for the first time in years I felt seen, heard. Aunt Susan shared that she too had to set boundaries with my mom when they were younger because Mom had a habit of leaning on others. "You're not alone, Trevor," she said, placing a hand on my shoulder. "Real family isn't just blood, it's the people who value you." Those words were like medicine. I went home that night, lay in bed, and for the first time in weeks I slept soundly without nightmares about my family haunting me. Aunt Susan and Mason became my new anchors. They texted regularly, invited me to small gatherings, and each time we met I felt the care I'd never received from my parents. Mason even dragged me fishing one weekend, a hobby I'd forgotten since high school. Standing by the lake holding a fishing rod, I felt like I was rediscovering a part of myself, the part I'd lost in the years of sacrificing for my family. Ryan, my best friend, was also indispensable. He wasn't just a listener, he helped me see the truth. One evening, as we sat in our usual bar, neon lights casting a glow on Ryan's serious face, he said, "Trevor, have you noticed how your family has been manipulating you with guilt? They made you think you had to sacrifice everything to be worthy of being their son. But that's not love, that's control." I sat there, my beer ice cold in my hand, feeling like a curtain had been pulled back. Ryan was right. All those years I'd lived in fear that if I didn't sacrifice, I'd lose my family. But now, having cut them off, I realized real family doesn't demand you trade away yourself. Ryan encouraged me to set clearer boundaries. He suggested blocking my parents' and Travis's numbers for a while to give myself space to breathe. I hesitated, but eventually did it. When my phone screen showed "number blocked," I felt both relief and guilt. But Ryan was there, reminding me that the guilt was something my family had planted in me, and I had the right to wash it away. The support from Aunt Susan, Mason, and Ryan helped me stand firm, but I still had to face waves of emotion. Some nights I lay awake, wondering if I'd been too harsh. I remembered my childhood when Dad taught me how to tie my shoes, when Mom sang me to sleep. Those memories stung my heart, but I knew they belonged to the past, a past that couldn't change the present. Aunt Susan sent me a handwritten card in which she wrote, "Trevor, you're stronger than you think. Don't let the past hold you back." I kept that card on my desk, a reminder that I wasn't alone. Gradually, I realized that family isn't the people you're born with. It's the ones who choose to stand by you, who value you. Aunt Susan and Mason became my new family, not because of blood, but because of their understanding and unconditional love. Ryan, with our beer nights and blunt advice, became the brother I never had. They were the ones who pulled me out of the darkness, helping me see that I deserved love without having to pay for it with myself. But this journey isn't over. I still need to learn how to heal old wounds, rebuild my life, and find the true meaning of living for myself. It's a long road, but for the first time I feel like I'm on the right path, with people who truly care by my side and with a heart learning to forgive itself. The months after cutting off financial support for my family were a strange time, as if I'd just stepped out of a storm and was learning to stand upright on my own 2 feet. Some days I felt a lightness, as if a heavy boulder had been lifted from my shoulders. But there were also nights when I lay awake, haunted by memories of my dad's harsh words, my mom's silent gaze, and Travis's triumphant smirk. I wondered if I could truly let go of the past or if it would forever be a shadow trailing me. Ryan, with his sharp intuition, sensed that I needed more than just beer nights and advice. One evening, as we sat in our usual bar, he slid a small piece of paper across the table. "This is the number of a therapist a friend of mine recommended. You should try it, Trevor. Not because you're weak, but because you deserve to heal." I looked at the paper, hesitant. Therapy? I grew up in a family where emotional struggles were brushed off with a curt, "Just be strong." But I was tired of pretending to be strong. I slipped the paper into my pocket, and a few days later I made the call. The therapist, a middle-aged woman named Ellen with a gentle yet incisive voice, became an unexpected guide. In our first sessions, I just sat there, recounting my family, the years of sacrifice, the feeling of being overlooked. Ellen listened without judgment, and gradually, she helped me see the wounds I'd tried to bury. "Trevor," she said in one session, "you've been carrying a burden that wasn't yours since you were very young. You don't need to prove your worth by sacrificing. Your worth was there from the start." Those words, simple yet profound, brought me to tears right there in her office, the first time I allowed myself to cry for myself. Ellen also introduced me to a support group for people with toxic families. The first time I stepped into the community center meeting room, I felt like an outsider. But as others began to share, stories of controlling mothers, dismissive fathers, favored siblings, I realized I wasn't alone. A woman named Maria spoke about cutting contact with her sister due to constant insults. A man named Greg shared how he learned to forgive himself for not being able to fix his family. Their stories were like mirrors, reflecting my own journey, and I began to feel that I could make it through. Alongside therapy, I rediscovered joys I'd long forgotten. I started running every morning, not to achieve anything grand, but to feel my breath, to hear my heartbeat pounding in my chest. Those runs along the Scioto River with the sunrise glinting on the water became medicine for my soul. I also returned to my hobby of building model cars, spending hours in my apartment assembling tiny parts. Each completed piece was a reminder that I could rebuild my life, one step at a time. Money, once my greatest burden, became a tool for freedom. The $15,000 a year I used to send to my family, I now invested in myself. I opened a new savings account, this time not as a safety net for my family, but to build my own future. I also had a small business idea, a bicycle repair shop in my neighborhood. I'd always loved fixing things, and the idea was both simple and feasible. I rented a small space, bought tools, and started taking in the first bikes. The work wasn't easy. Some days I worked late, hands covered in grease. But each time I handed a repaired bike back to a customer, I felt a joy I'd never experienced sending money to my family. I also moved to a new apartment, one my parents and Travis didn't know the address of. It was a tough but necessary decision. The new place was in a quiet neighborhood with windows overlooking a small park. I hung a landscape painting from Aunt Susan on the wall, bought a comfortable sofa, and for the first time I felt I truly had a home. Not just a place to exist, but a place to live. Then Kristen came into my life like an unexpected breeze. I met her at a community event where she was writing an article about small businesses in Columbus. Kristen was a journalist, sharp and witty, with a smile that made me forget my troubles. We started talking, and when I shared parts of my story, not the whole thing, just fragments, she listened with an understanding I'd never gotten from my family. "Trevor, you don't have to carry the world on your shoulders," she said during one date as we sat over coffee. "You're enough just being you." Those simple, sincere words made me feel seen in a way I'd never experienced. Kristen and I started dating, taking things slowly, but each moment with her felt like a step forward in my healing journey. She didn't push me to share everything, but she was always there, ready to listen when I wanted to talk. Once when I told her about the fateful birthday party, she took my hand and said, "You were stronger than anyone could imagine. Don't ever forget that." I smiled, feeling my heart lighten just a little. My healing journey isn't a straight line. Some days I still hear the old voices in my head telling me I'm selfish, that I abandoned my family. But each time I think of Ellen, the support group, Aunt Susan, Mason, Ryan, and Kristen. They're the ones who remind me I'm worthy of love, not for what I do, but for who I am. I'm learning to forgive, not my parents or Travis, but myself, for once believing my worth came from sacrifice. My bike shop is growing, not a massive success, but enough to make me proud. I run more regularly now, joined a local running club, and even signed up for a small marathon. Each step is an affirmation that I'm moving forward. I stay in touch with Aunt Susan and Mason, who invite me to new family gatherings, ones free of manipulation or expectations. And with Kristen, I'm starting to dream of a future, not as the one who carries the load, but as someone who lives fully for himself. This journey isn't over. I know the old wounds will still ache, but I've learned that healing isn't about erasing the past. It's about building a future where I can love and value myself. And as I stand in my bike shop watching a customer leave with a satisfied smile, I know I'm on the right path. A path to a new Trevor, stronger, freer, and most importantly, happier. But my story isn't just about me. It's also about what happened to the family I once thought was my entire world, and about the lessons etched deep into my heart through those turbulent years. After I cut off financial support, my family was forced to face the reality they'd avoided for so long. Without me to pay the property taxes, utility bills, or health insurance, my parents spiraled into a financial mess they weren't prepared for. I heard from Mason that they had to sell the house I grew up in, filled with memories both joyful and painful. They moved to a smaller apartment on the outskirts of Columbus where costs were lower but space was cramped. Dad went back to part-time work at an auto repair shop, and Mom took on freelance accounting to make ends meet. I didn't feel triumphant hearing this, but I also didn't feel the guilt I once would have. They'd had chances to value me, and they chose not to. As for Travis, he was still leeching off our parents like a shadow refusing to grow up. The game-changing startup they'd bet the house on collapsed as I'd predicted. Mason told me Travis was now trying to convince them to invest in a new idea, a space-themed coffee shop, but they no longer had the money to fund his fantasies. Part of me wanted to reach out to Travis, to tell him life isn't about pipe dreams but about practical steps. But I didn't. I'd learned I couldn't fix others, especially when they didn't want to change. My parents tried contacting me a few times, especially around the holidays. A year after the fateful birthday party, Mom sent a long text inviting me to Christmas dinner. "We're family, Trevor. Let the past go," she wrote. I stared at the message, my finger hovering over the keyboard, my heart aching with old memories. Holidays when I was a kid, when Mom baked cookies and Dad told silly jokes. But then I remembered Dad's words at the party. "Don't come back unless you've got the $50,000. And I replied, brief but firm, "Dad said I didn't need to come back without money." I'm respecting his words. I hit send, my heart pounding, but I knew I'd done the right thing. Family isn't something you cling to at all costs. It's something you build with people who value you. While my family struggled with their choices, I kept building my life. My little bike shop started getting regular customers. It wasn't a business empire, but it was enough to make me proud. Something entirely mine. I continued running every morning, and that spring I completed my first marathon with Kristen, Mason, and Ryan cheering at the finish line as if I'd won the Olympics. As I crossed the line, drenched in sweat and legs aching, I felt a pure joy. As if I'd conquered not just 26 miles, but the years of being held back by my family's expectations. Kristen became an indispensable part of my life. We didn't rush to talk about the future, but every moment with her made me feel safe, loved, and seen. One evening, as we lay on the sofa in my apartment, she asked, "If you could go back, would you do anything differently?" I thought about her question. About the years of sacrifice, the birthday party, the decision to cut ties. "No," I answered. "Everything led me here to who I am now. I don't regret it." She smiled, squeezed my hand, and I knew I'd found a true companion. Aunt Susan and Mason remained my closest allies. We held small gatherings, not to replace my old family, but to create a new one, a family built on respect and love. Aunt Susan gave me a small cactus, saying it was like me. Resilient, doesn't need much to thrive, but can still bloom. I placed the cactus on my windowsill, tending to it daily, a reminder of my own strength. The greatest lesson I learned wasn't about cutting ties, but about my own worth. I used to think my value came from sacrificing, from putting my family above everything. But through the painful and healing years, I realized my worth isn't in what I do for others, but in who I am. A man who knows how to love, to rise after falling, and to set boundaries when needed. True family isn't the people you're born with. It's the ones who choose to stand by you, who see you and love you without demanding you trade away yourself. I also learned that setting boundaries isn't selfish. It's an act of self-respect. Every time I said no to my family, I was saying yes to myself. And every step I took on this path, from therapy sessions with Ellen, to runs along the river, to moments of laughter with Kristen, Ryan, Mason, and Aunt Susan, was an affirmation that I deserved to live a life of my own. Standing in my bike shop, wiping down a freshly repaired bike, I thought about my journey. The birthday party where I was kicked out of the home I'd organized turned out to be an unexpected gift. It pushed me out of the cycle of meaningless sacrifice, forcing me to face the truth that I couldn't change my family, but I could change how I lived. And I did. I built a life where I'm no longer the background, but the painting. A vibrant, imperfect painting, but mine. I looked out the shop window, watching the sunset cast a golden glow over the street. I knew my healing journey would never truly end, but I wasn't afraid anymore. I had Kristen, Ryan, Mason, Aunt Susan, and myself, people who would always be there, not because of what I did, but because of who I am. And that was the most valuable lesson. True family is those who love you unconditionally, and sometimes you have to leave behind those who don't value you to find them. A year after that fateful birthday party, I decided to do something for myself. Something I never thought I'd do. Organize a camping trip to celebrate the freedom I'd found, not just financially, but emotionally. I invited Ryan, Mason, and Kristen to join. Aunt Susan, despite her age, insisted on coming, saying she wanted to breathe the mountain air with us. We chose a campsite near Alum Creek Lake, a few hours' drive from Columbus, where lush green hills and shimmering water reflected the sky like a mirror. As we set up camp, the afternoon sunlight filtering through the trees, I felt a peace I hadn't known in years. Ryan and Mason bickered playfully over who could start the campfire, each claiming to be the better survival expert. Kristen, with her radiant smile, helped me pitch the tent, while Aunt Susan sat in a folding chair recounting stories of her camping trips from her youth. When the fire roared to life, we gathered around it, roasting marshmallows and sharing stories. No one mentioned my parents or Travis. No one brought up old wounds. We just laughed, sang silly songs, and savored the moment. A moment where I truly felt I belonged. That night, after everyone had crawled into their tents to sleep, I sat alone by the dying fire, gazing at the twinkling stars above. I thought about my journey, about how a year ago I'd left my dad's birthday party with a broken heart. Back then, I thought I'd lost everything. But now, sitting here surrounded by nature and people who loved me, I realized that the moment Dad kicked me out wasn't a loss. It was a gift. It was the door to a new life, one where I no longer had to sacrifice myself to feel worthy. I pulled a scrap of paper from my jacket pocket and scribbled a short line. "Thank you, Dad, for giving me the chance to find myself." I tossed the paper into the fire, watching it burn to ash, and felt a final release. I was no longer angry at my parents or Travis. They'd chosen their path and I'd chosen mine. My path wasn't perfect. There were still days I doubted myself, nights I dreamed of old memories, but it was mine, and I loved it. When the sun rose the next morning, I stood by the lake, feeling the cool breeze brush my face. Kristen came up, wrapping her arms around me from behind. "What are you thinking about?" she asked softly. I smiled, gazing at the shimmering water. I'm thinking I've come a long way, and I'm grateful for it. She squeezed my hand and we stood there in silence, letting the moment sink deep into our souls. When we returned from the camping trip, I decided to write a post on an online forum I'd joined through my support group. I shared my story, not to boast or seek pity, but to connect with others who might be struggling as I once did. I wrote, "I'm Trevor, and this is my story. I used to think family was everything, that I had to sacrifice it all to keep them close. But I learned that real family is the people who value you, who love you without demanding you trade away yourself. Setting boundaries with toxic people, even if their blood isn't selfish. It's how you love yourself. If you're fighting to find the strength to break free from a family that doesn't see your worth, know you're not alone. Share your story. Tell me what helped you stand up, what gave you the courage to live for yourself." My post received dozens of comments from strangers sharing their stories about controlling mothers, selfish siblings, the times they had to cut ties to find themselves. Each story was a reminder that I wasn't alone, that my journey was part of a larger tapestry of people like me learning to stand up and love themselves. I stood in my bike shop, looking at the neatly repaired bikes on the racks, listening to the chime of the door as a customer walked in. I thought about the months gone by, the wounds that had healed and the scars that remained. I thought about Aunt Susan, Mason, Ryan, Kristen, and the people who'd become my true family. And I thought about myself, Trevor Ellis, 34 years old, no longer the background but a vibrant, colorful painting still being created every day. I stepped outside, the sunset casting a golden glow over the street, and I smiled. Life isn't a straight line, but I knew I was on the right path. And if you're reading this story, struggling to find your own path, I want to tell you, you're strong enough to set boundaries. You're worthy enough to be loved, and you're brave enough to live a life that's yours. Start one step at a time, and you'll find your own light, just as I did.